After my husband passed, I found a folded piece of paper tucked inside his old Bible. Not a verse, not a prayer, but an address I didn't recognize, and 3 words written in his handwriting. Go alone, Cecile. I went. What I found in that house made me understand that the man I had loved for 41 years had been trying to protect me in the only way he had left. My name is Cecile Ann Beaumont, and I am 68 years old. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in the same house my husband and I moved into when our youngest started kindergarten, which was 32 years ago. The magnolia tree in the front yard is taller than the roof line now. Howard planted it the summer we bought the house, in soil that was mostly clay and stubbornness, and he was unreasonably proud of the fact that it survived. Howard died on a Thursday in October. Pancreatic cancer. We had known for 7 months, which sounds like time enough to prepare, but it isn't. There is no preparing. There is only the knowing, and then the not knowing, and then one morning you wake up and the house is a different kind of quiet than it has ever been before. He was 69 years old. He had been a civil litigation attorney for 37 years, which meant he understood contracts and documentation and the particular danger of leaving things unwritten. He had always been meticulous. His filing cabinet at home was organized by year and category. His will had been updated twice in the last decade. He had left everything in order, or so I believed. I started going through his things about 3 weeks after the funeral, when the food stopped arriving and the phone calls spaced out and the house settled back into its silence. Howard's study was the logical place to begin. He had a large oak desk that had been his father's, and I sat down behind it on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee and a garbage bag and told myself I would start with the easy things. The easy things were not easy. Every pen I picked up, every legal pad with his handwriting on it, every business card rubber banded in a stack felt like a small interruption. I worked slowly. I allowed myself to be slow. I was in the second drawer when I found the Bible. It had been his mother's, a worn King James, with a cracked spine and her name written inside the front cover in ink so old it had faded to brown. Howard was not a particularly religious man, but he kept the Bible because he had loved his mother, and because he understood that some objects carry people inside them long after those people are gone. The piece of paper was folded in thirds and tucked between the pages of Psalms. I almost didn't unfold it. I thought it was probably a funeral card, something he had kept from a service years ago. But the paper was newer, and when I opened it, I saw his handwriting, deliberate and slanted the way it always was when he was writing something important. Cecile, if you're reading this, go to this address. Go alone. Don't tell the children yet. Everything you need is there. Beneath that, an address in Metairie, a suburb of New Orleans about an hour's drive from Baton Rouge. I read it standing at his desk. I read it again sitting in his chair. I read it a third time after I'd walked to the kitchen and back, as if distance might change what the word said. He had written, "Don't tell the children yet." Not "don't tell the children." Yet implies eventually. Yet implies he had thought about the sequencing. Howard was a lawyer. He chose words with intention. Our children. My daughter Teresa, who was 40 and lived 20 minutes away in Prairieville, and my son-in-law Clint, who had married her 15 years ago and worked in commercial real estate. They had 2 kids of their own, a boy and a girl, 8 and 11. And then there was my son Philip, who was 37 and lived in Houston and called every Sunday and had always been quieter than his sister, more careful, more like Howard in that way. Why would Howard write "Don't tell the children" about an address in Metairie? I put the paper in my cardigan pocket and did not think about it clearly for the rest of that day. I made dinner. I didn't eat. I watched television. I didn't follow. I sat in the living room with the paper in my pocket like a small stone, present, and waited, and I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Howard was a reasonable man. Whatever was at that address, there was a reasonable explanation. I did not sleep well. I lay in our bed, which still held the particular arrangement of pillows he had preferred, and I thought about the word "yet." 4 days passed before I drove to Metairie. In those 4 days, Teresa called twice. She was solicitous, checking in, asking whether I needed help with any of the paperwork or the financial accounts. She and Clint had been helping manage several things since Howard had gotten sick, a practical arrangement, because Howard had trusted them with certain financial access when he could no longer manage things himself. He had added Clint's name to one of the brokerage accounts as a co-signatory, meant to be a stopgap, something temporary. Clint called once, which was unusual. He typically communicated through Teresa. He asked whether the estate attorney had been in touch, whether I had reviewed the brokerage statements recently, whether I needed any help organizing Howard's files. He said it in the easy way of a man asking questions he already knows the answers to. I said I was still working through things and thanked him and hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after. Clint had always been efficient. That was the word I reached for, though it wasn't quite right. He was efficient the way a man is efficient when he has a clear picture of what he wants and is moving steadily toward it. I drove to Metairie on a Wednesday. I told no one. I typed the address into my phone's GPS and took I-10 east and exited into a neighborhood of mid-century ranch houses and magnolia trees and streets named after birds. The address was a beige house on a corner lot with a one-car garage and a pot of yellow mums on the front step, still alive, which meant someone was tending them or had been recently. I sat in my car for 10 minutes. Then I got out. The key Howard had left. I had found it inside the folded paper, so small I had almost missed it. A silver key on a plain ring fit the front door. What I walked into was not what I had feared. No evidence of a secret kept from me in the way a person first fears when they find a hidden address. No photographs of strangers. No life parallel to the one I had known. What I found was a single room off the main hall that had been converted into a workspace, a metal filing cabinet, a folding table with a laptop, closed and dusty, a small safe built into the wall behind a framed photograph of the two of us from our anniversary trip to Charleston, which I had not known was there, and on the table an envelope with my name on it in Howard's handwriting. I sat down in the folding chair and opened the envelope. The letter was 6 pages, legal pad paper. His handwriting, dated 3 months before he died. He had written it in the measured, organized way he wrote everything, numbered sections, clear transitions, nothing left vague. He had found out 14 months before his death that Clint had been moving money out of the brokerage account. Not all at once, not obviously. Clint had co-signatory access, which meant he could authorize transfers with Howard's name attached, and he had used that access carefully, methodically, in amounts small enough not to immediately alarm and frequent enough to add up. Howard had discovered it the way he discovered most things, by reading the fine print, in this case a quarterly statement that didn't reconcile the way it should have. He had not confronted Clint. He had spent 3 months documenting everything instead, building a record the way he had built records for clients for 37 years. The filing cabinet, the letter explained, contained printed statements, transfer records, a log he had kept in his own hand of every withdrawal, cross-referenced with dates and amounts. The safe contained a USB drive and 3 folders of original documents, including a signed letter from a financial advisor named only as TW, whose name appeared on several of the receiving accounts. The total Howard estimated was somewhere between $180,000 and $200,000. He wrote, "I am sorry I didn't handle this while I was still well enough to handle it properly. I was afraid of what it would do to Teresa. I was afraid of what it would do to the grandchildren. And I was ashamed because I trained my whole career to see exactly this kind of thing coming, and I did not see it until it was already well underway. You are more capable of this than I was. Trust that. And trust the attorney whose name I've written on the back of this letter. She doesn't know you're coming, but she will take the case." I sat in that folding chair for a long time. The afternoon light came through a single window on the west wall and moved across the floor the way it does when you're very still and the world keeps going around you. Then I opened the safe. The filing cabinet held exactly what Howard had described: 14 months of documented withdrawals from the joint brokerage account, each one initialed with Clint's co-signatory mark, each one routed to accounts that did not belong to either Howard or me. The USB drive held scanned documents and a folder of email correspondence between Clint and the person referred to as TW, discussing what they called the repositioning of funds and, in one email dated 6 weeks before Howard was diagnosed, a note about the importance of moving before things get legally complicated. I photographed every page with my phone. I copied the USB drive contents to my cloud storage using the Wi-Fi network in the house. The password was written on an index card taped to the inside of the safe door in Howard's handwriting. Then I locked the house and drove home. I did not call Teresa. I did not call Philip. I drove home, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table and wrote down the name on the back of Howard's letter. Ellen Tran, Estate and Probate Attorney, New Orleans. Howard had written, "She handled the Fontenot case in 2019. She is thorough, and she is not afraid of family situations. Tell her Howard Beaumont sent you." I called Ellen Tran's office the next morning and made an appointment for Friday. It was Thursday when I noticed the car. I had not been back to Metairie, but I drove past the street that day on an errand that took me close enough. There was an unfamiliar silver pickup parked half a block from the house. Clint drove a silver pickup. A lot of people drove silver pickup. A lot of people drove silver pickups. I noted it and kept driving. That evening, Teresa called. Her voice was warm, as it almost always was, because Teresa was genuinely a warm person. That was the thing I had always held on to, that my daughter's warmth was real, even if her husband's calculation was not. She asked if I found anything in Howard's study that needed sorting. Offered to come help on Saturday. Said Clint had some time and would be happy to go through the filing cabinet if I needed. I told her I had already been through the study. She was quiet for a moment, just a beat. Then, "Oh, did you find everything you needed?" I said I had found everything I was looking for. Another small pause. Then warmth resumed. A Sunday dinner invitation. A mention of the kids. A question about whether I was sleeping. I said I was managing. I thanked her and ended the call. I sat afterward in Howard's armchair and thought about the difference between warmth and loyalty. Teresa was warm. Whether she was loyal to me or to Clint in the place where those two things ran up against each other, I did not yet know. I was not ready to find out. Ellen Tran's office was on the 4th floor of a building in Metairie, 10 minutes from the house Howard had kept. She was 52 years old, small and still in the way of people who are very sure of themselves, with reading glasses on her desk and a yellow legal pad and the specific attentiveness of someone who had learned to listen to things people were afraid to say out loud. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she uncapped her pen. "Did you bring the documents?" I opened my bag and set the originals on her desk. She read through them steadily. When she set the last page down, she looked at me with the direct, level gaze of someone who had made an assessment and was comfortable sharing it. "Mrs. Beaumont," she said, "your husband was a very thorough man." "He was a litigation attorney for 37 years, I said. "He knew what evidence looked like." "It will serve you well," she said. "You have a strong case." Ellen filed the first motions within the week. She moved quickly and explained each step in plain language, a formal objection to the account modifications on the grounds that the co-signatory authority had been exceeded, a request for a full audit of the brokerage account, and a referral to the Louisiana Office of Financial Institutions, which would notify the brokerage and freeze the receiving accounts pending investigation. She told me the process would not be fast, but that Howard's documentation was, in her assessment, unusually complete for a non-attorney. I told her that was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in weeks. She didn't smile exactly, but something in her expression shifted slightly, which I came to understand was her version of it. I drove home and tried to keep living the way I had been living. I called Philip that evening, not to tell him everything, but because I needed his voice. He asked how I was doing, and I said I was taking it one day at a time, which was true. He said he was thinking of driving down from Houston next month. I told him I would make his father's red beans and rice. The call from Clint came 8 days later. Not from Teresa. Clint called directly, which told me something had shifted on their end. His voice was doing the thing that voices do when they are being careful. Too even, too measured, the way water sounds when it's moving fast under a calm surface. He said he'd heard I had retained an attorney. I said I was entitled to retain an attorney. He said of course I was. And then there was a pause, and then he said that I needed to understand that what I was doing could have serious consequences for the family, that audits were disruptive, that Teresa was upset, that the grandchildren didn't need to grow up in the middle of legal proceedings. I let him finish. Howard had always said, "Let the witness exhaust the prepared statement before you ask the question that matters." "Clint," I said, "I found the account statements. I found the transfer records. I found the emails." The silence on the other end was the silence of a man whose footing has gone. not quiet. A different quality entirely. The silence of someone recalibrating. Then Teresa's voice came on the line. She had been there the whole time, which I had suspected. Her voice was composed in a way her natural warmth didn't quite account for, controlled and deliberate, in a way that told me she had known more than she had let on, or at least had known enough to stand beside the man who did. Mom. Her voice. What you think you found is not the whole picture. There were conversations between Clint and Dad. Dad understood what was happening. Then you will have no difficulty demonstrating that to the auditors, I said. If you go through with this, she said, and her voice dropped, not raised, but lowered, which was worse, you are going to destroy this family. Is that what you want? At this point in your life, do you want to spend whatever time you have left in courtrooms? At this point in your life. I held the phone and looked at the magnolia tree outside the window. Howard had planted that tree 32 years ago in clay soil. It was taller than the roofline. If going through with this means asking for what your father built over 40 years, I said, then yes. That is what I want. Please do not contact me again directly. If you have something to say it to my attorney. I ended the call. My hands, when I looked at them, were steady. I was surprised by that. My oldest friend is a woman named Opal Gridgery. We met in 1989 at a neighborhood association meeting about a proposed cell tower and discovered that we held identical opinions on both the cell tower and the refreshments, which is a sufficient basis for a 35-year friendship. She was 66, a retired high school librarian, a widow since 2021, and she had the particular gift of saying the thing that needed to be said without making you feel carved open by it. I called her on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after the legal proceedings began. I told her everything. She listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Clint has always known exactly what things are worth. The whole time I've known him, he's never once looked at your house without thinking about square footage. I hadn't told her about the receiving accounts or TW. She had arrived at her conclusion through 35 years of watching a man at family dinners. How did you know? I asked. People who love you ask how you're doing, she said. People who need something from you ask how things are going. I thought about that for a long time. The letter came 2 weeks later, delivered to my mailbox by hand. Not the mail by hand, which meant Clint had driven to my neighborhood, which told me everything I needed to know about the nature of the arrangement. He had driven. Teresa, presumably, had written. It was civil and surgical, a proposed private settlement, $60,000 structured as a family gift, in exchange for my withdrawal of all formal proceedings. The letter used the phrase, avoid prolonged conflict, twice. It used the phrase, at this stage of your life, once. It also noted that a legal process of this nature can be emotionally taxing for an older individual navigating grief. An older individual navigating grief. I brought the letter to Ellen. She read it with the composed attention she brought to everything. 60,000, she said, when the documented amount is closer to 200. Yes, I said. She set the letter down. They're scared. This offer is a measure of how scared they are. People who offer 20 cents on the dollar are people who have done the math and know they're exposed. Should I be worried about what they do next? Be alert, she said. People who make offers like this and are refused tend to apply pressure before they fold. It usually takes one of two forms, an escalation of emotional appeal or an attempt to complicate the evidence picture. Neither will work here. She looked at me steadily. Your husband made sure of that. I thanked her and drove home. That evening, I went for the first time to a support group for widows that met Tuesday nights at Episcopal Church on Government Street. My friend Opal had mentioned it several times over the past year with the gentle persistence of someone who has found a useful thing and wants to share it without pushing. I had resisted because I am not by nature someone who finds it easy to be witnessed by strangers, but I was tired of carrying things alone. There were 9 women in the group, ages from 58 to 79. They were funny and direct in the way women get when they have stopped spending energy on performance. A woman named Constance, who was 71 and had been widowed for 4 years, looked at me over her coffee cup and said, the first 6 months, everyone treats you like you're made of glass. After that, they start wondering when you're going to be useful again. She wasn't wrong. I had felt that shift already. I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness. Not resolution. Something more like the knowledge that I was not the only person navigating this particular terrain, which is its own kind of company. They came on a Saturday in February, about 5 months after Howard died. I saw Clint's pickup in my driveway from the kitchen window while the coffee was still brewing. They had not called. That told me the visit was about pressure, not conversation. Teresa was wearing a jacket I had given her for her birthday 2 years ago. I noticed that. I don't know why I noticed that. Clint stood slightly in front of her, which was their usual arrangement in difficult situations. He was better at it, more practiced, and they both knew it. He was carrying a paper bag from the Vietnamese bakery on Main Street. The one I liked, the one that made the banh mi with the extra jalapenos. The bag sat on my coffee table for the entire visit. I did not offer them coffee. I poured a cup for myself, because having something to do with your hands is a practical matter. Clint began. He was sorry about the phone call. Things had gotten heated. He and Teresa were under a great deal of financial pressure. The commercial real estate market, some investments that hadn't performed, the kids' school expenses, he didn't use the word theft. He used words like borrowing against what would have come to us eventually, and an arrangement Howard was aware of and comfortable with and something we all understood. He said all of it with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed until rehearsal felt like memory. He did not look at me while he spoke. He looked at the coffee table, at the window, at his own hands. I let him finish. Then Teresa spoke. She leaned forward and her voice shifted, lowered, became the intimate register of daughter to mother, woman to woman, the register that is hardest to resist because it is the register of real conversations, and she was borrowing it for a different purpose. Mom, this has been the hardest year. You lost Dad. You're going through all of this alone. The last thing any of us want is for you to spend your energy on legal proceedings when you could be spending it with the grandchildren, with Philip, with the people who love you. She paused. If you stop this now, we can work out something fair between us. Something that doesn't drag everyone to courts and depositions. You deserve peace. You deserve to spend this time resting. I looked at her. I thought about the word fair. I thought about how easily that word comes to people who have already taken something and are now negotiating the terms of keeping part of it. I thought about Howard at a folding table in a house in Metairie, printing bank statements and writing things down because he knew he was running out of time to say them. He had done that alone. I was not going to let it mean nothing. What was taken from me, I said, is approximately $200,000. Your offer in the letter was $60,000. What you are calling fair, what number did you have in mind? Clint's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. That's not the kind of conversation we came to have. Fairness is a number, I said, not a feeling. And the number I can document to a court is $200,000 plus my legal costs. Clint started to say something. Teresa touched his arm. A small, quick gesture, and he stopped. That gesture, the way she used it, told me things I had been half knowing for a long time. We came to give you an opportunity, Clint said. His warmth was gone now, not all at once, but steadily, like a tide going out. We're trying to handle this privately, out of respect for your father's memory and for this family. You're saying no to that. I just want to make sure you understand what you're choosing. I understand exactly, I said. I think you should go. Teresa looked at me then, not with Clint's composure. She looked at me the way my daughter looks at me when she is not performing anything, when it is just her face. And for a moment, she looked like the girl who had cried in my lap the night before her first day of high school, who had been so afraid and so determined that the fear and the determination had occupied the same expression. I still remembered the weight of her head on my shoulder. Then Clint stood. He picked up the paper bag from the coffee table. He did not leave it. He took it with the deliberateness of someone removing something from a negotiation that had not gone his way. They left. I listened to the pickup back out of my driveway. I sat very still for a moment afterward. What I felt was not triumph. It was not even relief. It was the cold, specific knowledge that the next several months were going to be difficult, and underneath that knowledge, something harder and more durable. Howard had been afraid. His fear had cost us both something. I had made a different decision. I meant to keep making it. The hearing was held on a Tuesday in April in a civil courtroom at the Baton Rouge courthouse. Ellen had spent the preceding month preparing me with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. We reviewed the documentation many times. She walked me through the sequence of transfers, the account modifications, the email chain, the connections to the receiving accounts linked to Clint's business partner, a man named T.W., whom the investigation had identified as a mortgage broker named Thomas Weller, who had processed 2 of the larger transfers and was now the subject of a separate inquiry. She told me what to expect from Clint and Teresa's attorney, a man named Perkins, who handled mostly real estate closings. She also told me what to expect from myself, that I might feel the impulse to react, that the most useful thing I could do was be exactly what I was, a 68-year-old widow sitting calmly beside her attorney with a documented case that spoke for itself. "You don't need to do anything," she said the afternoon before. "Howard already did the work. You just have to be present for it." I dressed carefully that morning. A dark blue blazer, low heels. I arrived before Clint and Teresa. I found my seat beside Ellen, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled, fluorescent lights. The particular stillness of a room where difficult things happen regularly. The judge was a man in his early 60s with reading glasses and the expression of someone who had heard many versions of this story and was no longer surprised by any of them. That was, unexpectedly, a comfort. They came in together, Clint in a dark suit, composed, carrying himself with the ease of a man who had not yet fully assessed his own position. Teresa walked beside him, not behind, which I noted. Their attorney settled in next to them. Perkins opened on their behalf. He was smooth. He presented the verbal approval narrative, that Howard had been fully informed of the transfers, that this had been a family estate planning arrangement made with the patriarch's explicit blessing, that my challenge represented a misunderstanding of my late husband's intentions. He was confident and well organized, and building on nothing. Ellen's opening was quieter and took less time. She presented the documentary record in order, the account statements, the modification forms, the transfer logs Howard had kept, the email chain between Clint and Thomas Weller. She did not editorialize, she let the numbers do it. I watched the judge's face as she walked through each exhibit. His expression did not change, but his pen moved steadily across his notepad, and it moved more during Ellen's presentation than during Perkins's. Clint was called to testify. His account of the verbal approval arrangement was fluent and detailed. He described Howard as having been fully involved in estate planning conversations, as having understood and endorsed the transfer structure, as having trusted Clint with the management of family finances. Ellen cross-examined him on 3 specific things. First, the dates. He had said the key conversation with Howard occurred in March of the year before Howard was diagnosed. Ellen showed him a travel record placing Howard in Baton Rouge at a legal conference that entire week. Clint said he might be misremembering the month. Second, the transfer authorization forms. Ellen placed a specific form on the table and asked Clint to explain the co-signatory line, which showed Howard's name in handwriting that the bank had flagged during the audit as inconsistent with Howard's other documented signatures. Clint said there may have been a processing issue at the bank. Ellen asked him whether he was familiar with the term signature falsification under Louisiana state law. The room was very quiet. Third, the email chain. She read him one email, dated 2 weeks after Howard's cancer diagnosis, in which Clint had written to Thomas Weller, "We need to complete the remaining transfers before the situation with H becomes a legal matter. He won't be in a position to complicate things much longer." Clint said the language was informal, not indicative of intent. Ellen said, "Your father-in-law received his cancer diagnosis 9 days before this email was written. Can you explain how the phrase 'he won't be in a position to complicate things much longer' reflects a voluntary, openly discussed family arrangement?" Clint looked at Teresa. It was a small movement, involuntary, the reflex of a person who has run out of prepared responses and is reaching for something solid. Teresa was looking at her hands. She did not look back at him. That moment, Clint turning toward my daughter and finding nothing there, was its own kind of verdict. The ruling came 5 weeks later. I was in Ellen's office when her paralegal brought in the document. Ellen read it in silence. Then she looked up. "Full restitution," she said. $194,000, plus your documented legal costs. The court has also accepted the referral to the Louisiana Attorney General's office for financial fraud. I sat with that. Outside Ellen's window, Metairie was going about its business, indifferent and ordinary, the way the world always is, on days when something important resolves. The signature falsification finding, Ellen said, has been forwarded to the district attorney. That is a separate criminal matter. It will be prosecuted separately. I nodded. I did not feel elation. I felt the particular sensation of something that had been suspended for a long time coming to rest in the place where it was supposed to be. The way Howard had once described the completion of a sound repair. Not dramatic, just right. The load properly distributed again. Ellen slid the ruling toward me. I read the operative paragraph twice, slowly, the way Howard had always taught me to read anything that mattered. The court had found in my favor on all primary counts. I thanked her. She said, "Your husband documented this the way he had documented cases for 37 years. Complete, organized, anticipating the counter-argument." She paused. "He knew exactly what he was doing." "He always said the work is in the preparation," I said. "Anyone can deliver the argument. The preparation is where cases are won or lost." "He was right," she said, "and you did the rest." The civil judgment was enforceable immediately. Thomas Weller cooperated with investigators and provided documentation that extended the financial crimes referral beyond Clint alone. I did not seek this. It was a consequence of the process, but I will not pretend I was sorry. Clint's real estate license came under review by the Louisiana Real Estate Commission within a month of the criminal referral. His commercial real estate practice, which had been built substantially on referral relationships in the Baton Rouge area, began to deteriorate in the way that practices do when reputation is the primary asset and the reputation is gone. Teresa called me 6 weeks after the ruling. I answered because she was my daughter, and that had not changed, even though other things had. She was not composed on the phone. She had been crying, which was something I had not heard from her in years. She said she was sorry. She said she had not known about the signature on the forms, had not known how far it had gone. She said she had told herself for a long time that what Clint was doing was a kind of estate planning, a way of getting ahead of what would have come to them anyway, and that she had known it wasn't right, but had told herself it wasn't her place to, and she stopped. "Teresa," I said, "you don't have to explain it to me in a way that makes it smaller. You can just tell me what's true." A long pause. "I knew it was wrong," she said. "I kept waiting for Dad to say something, and he never did, and I told myself that meant it was okay." "Your father was afraid of what it would do to you if he confronted Clint," I said. "He protected you at his own expense. That is what he did his whole life." She was quiet for a long time. "I love you," I said, "and we are going to have to rebuild this from a very different place than where we were. I don't know yet how long that will take, or exactly what it looks like, but I am not going anywhere." She said, "I know." I ended the call and sat in the living room for a while. Not in Howard's chair, in mine, by the window, where the magnolia tree was visible from where I sat. Philip drove down from Houston the weekend after the ruling. He had known since before the hearing. I had told him because he deserved to know and because I had been carrying too much alone for too long. He had been quiet when I told him, the way he is quiet when something lands hard. Then he said he was coming down. That was enough. We sat on the back porch on Saturday evening with 2 glasses of bourbon, which Howard had kept a very particular bottle of, and the yard was doing what yards do in Louisiana in spring, growing in every direction with no concern for human problems. The Confederate jasmine along the back fence was blooming, which it did every March, reliably and without effort, the way certain good things do. Philip said, Dad would have liked Ellen Tran. He recommended her himself, I said. He researched her. I paused. He spent his last months making sure I would be okay. That is what he was doing. We sat with that for a while. "Are you okay?" Philip asked. I thought about it honestly. "I am not okay in the way I was before," I said. "But I am okay in a way I didn't know I was capable of yet." "Those are different things." He nodded. He understood that. He was Howard's son. I kept the house in Metairie. This surprised me when I decided it, and surprised Ellen, and would have surprised Clint considerably, but it had been Howard's last deliberate act on my behalf. That house, those files, the key in the Bible, and there was something in me that was not ready to close the door on it, literally or otherwise. I had the interior painted, the mums on the front step replaced with a pot of gardenias. I went there on Wednesday mornings with a thermos of coffee and sometimes a book, and sometimes nothing at all. And I sat at the small table where Howard had sat and kept his records, and I did whatever I liked. Sometimes I wrote letters, sometimes I called Opal, sometimes I simply sat and listened to the neighborhood, a lawnmower, children somewhere. The particular mid-morning quiet of a street that has no idea it was once part of something difficult. It was not merely a house. It was proof that Howard had known me well enough to leave me, not just a case, but a place. A room of my own, which is something I had not known I needed until I was already in it. Opal and I still walk 3 mornings a week, early, before the heat sets in, down through the neighborhood along the creek path, where the live oaks are old enough that the roots have lifted the sidewalk in places. She is the best kind of company, because she does not require anything from you except honesty, and honesty she gives back in kind. On one of our walks in late May, she said, "You seem like yourself again." I asked what she meant. "Before," she said, "you seemed like you were watching your life from somewhere nearby. Now you seem like you're in it." I turned that over. It was accurate. Something had shifted. Not the grief, which was still present and would be for a long time, but my relationship to the ground beneath it. I had stopped waiting for something to give way. Teresa and I were, as of that summer, in the process of figuring out what we were to each other now. It was slow work. She had separated from Clint in April. The criminal proceedings against him were ongoing. She was living in a smaller house in Prairieville with the kids, working part-time, starting over in ways that I knew were hard, and that I also knew she was capable of. I did not tell her it would be fine. I did not know that it would be fine. I told her that I was here, and that whatever we needed to rebuild, we had time to build it carefully. That was the truth I had available to offer. The grandchildren came for dinner on Sundays. I made Howard's red beans and rice, which takes all day and is worth it. The kids ate too much and argued about the television and fell asleep on the couch in the easy way of children who know they are in a safe place. I covered them with the throw from Howard's reading chair and turned off the lamp and stood there for a moment in the quiet kitchen with the dishes done and the magnolia tree visible through the window in the dark. He had planted that tree in soil that was mostly clay. It was taller than the roofline now. I had learned something this year that I did not expect to learn, which is that grief and courage are not opposites. Grief makes you soft, and soft things absorb pressure. They do not always break. Howard had been afraid to use what he knew, and I understood why, because I had been afraid too in those early weeks. Afraid of losing my daughter, afraid of the legal process, afraid of being seen as the older woman who didn't understand what she was getting into. But I had walked through a door he left unlocked for me, and on the other side of it was everything I needed to stand up for what was mine. If the person you loved left you a locked door, go through it. You are allowed to. You deserve to know what's on the other side. And whatever you find there, I promise you, you are more capable of handling it than you have been told. What would you have done in my place? I mean that sincerely. Leave me a comment and tell me. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, tell me that too. I like knowing how far a story travels. Good day, dear listeners. This is Diana. Thank you for being here. I think about Howard sitting alone at that folding table in Metairie, printing bank statements, writing everything down in the careful hand of a man who had spent his whole career making sure the record was clear. He knew he was running out of time. He was afraid of what the truth would cost his daughter, afraid of what it would do to the grandchildren, afraid of the fracture. And so he did the only thing he could still do. He built me a door and left it unlocked and trusted that I would walk through it when I was ready. What happened to Clint was not an accident, and it was not luck. It was the direct result of choices made over years. Small decisions that seemed safe at the time. Transfers in amounts just below the threshold. Emails written in careful language, a signature on a form that was not his to authorize. Each one a brick in something he thought was a foundation. What he was actually building was a case. Howard just made sure someone would be there to present it. I used to think that being a good person was mostly about intention, that if you meant well, if you loved the people around you and tried not to cause harm, that was enough. What I understand now is that goodness without judgment is incomplete. Clint was not without intelligence, he was without honesty. And those are different things. The smartest move he made in years was to marry someone who trusted him. The worst move he made was to assume that trust had no bottom. Ellen Tran once told me that the most powerful thing I could do in that courtroom was simply to be present. Not to perform grief or certainty or righteous anger, just to sit there and let Howard's work speak. That is something I carry with me now. There are moments in life when the most courageous thing is not the dramatic thing. It is the quiet thing. It is showing up. It is opening the safe. It is driving an hour on a Wednesday afternoon because the man you loved for 41 years asked you to trust him one more time. I was 68 years old and I was afraid, and I did it anyway. Not because I was certain of the outcome. Because the alternative, leaving that door closed, letting what Howard had built in that room mean nothing, was something I could not live with. Courage is not the absence of fear. I know that now in a way I only half knew before. It is the decision you make when the fear is fully present and you act anyway, one step at a time, one document at a time, one phone call to an attorney you have never met. Opa once told me that people who love you ask how you're doing. People who need something from you ask how things are going. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count since then. It is the kind of thing that sounds simple and is actually a compass, if you let it be. The magnolia tree is still there. Howard planted it in clay soil 32 years ago, and everyone who saw him do it thought it probably wouldn't survive. He knew it would. He just measured the ground carefully first, amended the soil, and gave it what it needed. That is what he did for me too, in the end.